Roger, thanks for coming back.
Morning, Robin.
Welcome to our second session. So as we covered off last time, today we'll be doing issuing and serving a quarantine notice. Again, this is all based in the room here. We're not actually going out into the field. Obviously, when you're doing this for real, you'll go out and serve the quarantine notice, and we'll cover off how to do that. How did you go with everything after the last day?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, didn't go home and come up with any brilliant questions you wanted to ask or anything?
No.
No?
All under control.
And we haven't had any outbreaks this week, so you haven't had the opportunity to put it into practice. So a little bit different today. I've got a PowerPoint that we'll go through together and we'll work through the steps. So this is going to be some work skill instructions, slightly different to the last one. So we'll have our step-by-steps that we get to follow on how we're doing that. It is covered in the PowerPoint, but good to see you've got some notes there. Yes, wasn't the camera.
No.
So I guess we'll just get started with the quarantine. For some reason it's not letting me present in normal presentation mode. There it is, it's at the top. Alright, so I've got a couple of handout materials. These are very clearly designated as training only, not real. So that's the property map, property information, and your not real quarantine notice. So at the end for your assessment, I will need you to give me a completed quarantine notice. We will discuss how in a real situation you will serve that on a person and the documentation you need to follow, but this is the one you need to complete for your assessment. So we'll get started. The recording won't be able to see the PowerPoint, but it'll get a copy of it anyway. So as I said, this falls under those national course codes that we discussed last time, and this is just another section of the practical side of working in a biosecurity emergency response. So today's session, by the end of this session, you'll be able to correctly complete a quarantine notice for an emergency animal disease and appropriately serve the quarantine notice and document the service of that notice. As we work through the session, please refer to the documents that I've given you. So you've got the quarantine notice, which is this one, the land owner manager information sheet, and your property map. So just to be aware, for quarantines, unfortunately you already are, you need to be authorised under the Livestock Disease Control Act of 1994. You must have completed your client interactive defensive tactic trainings or refresher, so you will have completed those. They're part of the standard role requirements. And obviously follow the site safety procedures here in the office. And remember, our first priority is not dying. So the scenario is we have a suspect case of lumpy skin disease has been identified on a property near Lake Charm in Victoria. Further clinical testing is required for confirmation. So at this point we are what kind of premise?
SP?
Yeah, we are an SP, a suspect premise. You've been deployed to collect information and issue a quarantine notice. So we're not going through the collecting of the information in this session. I'm sure you've seen Max forms plenty of times and they are pretty straightforward. So the mission is to safeguard the industry and local communities' livestock health by promptly detecting, containing and preventing the spread of lumpy skin disease to additional properties by completing and serving a quarantine notice under Section 110 of the Livestock Disease Control Act of 1994. I'm not going to make you remember the section, so you can refer to that if you wish to at any point, but we'll go through it anyway. And to execute that, you're going to pretend to attend the property using the property map and ownership details obtained on arrival, which is in that second sheet. Correctly complete and serve a quarantine notice. And if I press the right button. So, the legislative support, and again, I don't expect you to remember this. So Section 110 of the Livestock Disease Control Act is what covers what allows us to issue a quarantine notice. So it basically says an inspector, so yourself, if you believe on reasonable grounds in order to prevent the spread of lumpy skin disease, you need to quarantine the property, then we can issue a quarantine notice. And it can prohibit or restrict movement, and a copy of the quarantine notice must be given to the owner or person in charge or in apparent charge of the premise, place or vehicle. So we can issue a quarantine notice on a vehicle. It is very difficult to do so, and we're not covering that in this particular scenario. But if the need arises, there are people you can contact that can talk you through how to do that. So step 2. So that was our step 1. This is the last one. We're going to identify our legislative support, which is at section 110 of the quarantine notice. Step 2 is to establish who is in charge. So we need to issue the quarantine notice to the person who is in charge. So we've gone out, we've talked to our property owner, and this is where you're going to need to fill things in on your quarantine notice example. So referring to our property owner manager information sheet, the owner is the first person. There is a manager there. So for this example, just for ease of completion, we're going to ignore that the property manager exists, and our property owner is the first person listed. I've only lightly crossed that out because you still need the information here. What we do in these scenarios is we issue the quarantine notice to the owner and we provide a copy to the manager of the land parcel so that they are aware of the requirements. But the notice must first be served on the owner. So we've established who the owner is. It's Mr. Charlie Doberman. So you've inserted his name in there. The recipient's address will not necessarily be the address of the premise being quarantined. So as you've correctly done there, you've put his address of where he resides rather than the property that we are quarantining, which is further down. So referring to our scenario, establishing the disease that's involved, as we discussed in the scenario, it's lumpy skin disease. So in general, a property is placed under quarantine due to an exotic disease detection or suspicion. Lumpy skin is considered under the Livestock Disease Control Act as an exotic disease, so we just need to pop in lumpy skin disease there. The only sort of exception to that is anthrax, which is known as endemic, but we still quarantine for that. And direction can be given from the Chief Veterinary Officer's unit to quarantine a property for another purpose, but again, we're not covering that in this scenario. So you pop that in there. Do you want to just let me know what that says?
Lumpy skin.
You know, so what are we saying?
What are we doing?
To Charlie of this address.
Yep.
What are we telling him? Under section 110 of the Livestock Disease Control Act.
Believing on reasonable grounds that in order to prevent the spread of lumpy skin, it is necessary to do so, I order the premise place vehicle, vehicle described below, the quarantine area be quarantined.
Yeah. So you do need to include lumpy skin disease. So we need to be really clear that it is very obvious. So that would be where, particularly when our vets are writing quarantine notices, we need to be quite clear with them that it has to be using correct terminology, but in a manner that our person receiving it can understand it. Otherwise, if they don't comply with it because it says in there some really long Latin name that nobody knows what it is, it's a little unfair on them. So great that you've got lumpy skin disease. It is important to note that it's a disease though. Alright, so you've completed that. Step 4 is to establish the premise, place or vehicle to be quarantined. So again, referring to our scenario, we've got our map, we've got our address. Whilst it is simple to list only the address of the property on a quarantine notice, it needs to be more specific to meet its objectives. So the objective is to prevent the spread of disease. So we need to be really clear on where we're talking about. So the best way to do it is to clearly describe the land parcel in as many details as possible, and the use of a map is strongly encouraged. So I'll get you to fill in on your thing the best. So a gold star example for this one, I'll get you to fill it in and you can tell me what you've put. and then we might see if we can't improve on it a little. So let me know when you've completed that bit.
Yep.
All right, so let me know what you've got.
So description there is 350 Yarrabee Road, Lake Charm, Victoria 3581, including two paddocks east of Prescott Lane, south of Yarrabee Road.
Lovely. I like it.
And then probably as outlined in map attached.
Yeah, perfect. So the gold
Sorry,
star example
reference.
I've got is more or less exactly what you've got there. 350 Yarrabee Road, Lake Charm, Victoria. Property on the southeast corner of Yarrabee Road and Prescott Lane, Lake Charm, as shown outlined in red on attached map. But, which is exactly what you've just referred to, the two land parcels, which is more specific than this. And that's really good, as long as there are only two land parcels, which we don't have the land parcels separated on the map, but there probably is. So something to note is that there is a house on the corner, little corner there. But that's great. So step 5 is establishing any vehicle movements. So this section is relevant to vehicle movements which do not involve the movement of livestock products, fodder or fittings, or any sand, soil or other material, as should be written in there. So there are two options for each movement. So we either have that movement is prohibited, which is the default option, particularly where the vehicle movement is a factor for spreading disease and the risk cannot be managed. So anthrax would be a really good example of that. Vehicle movement is prohibited in a case of anthrax. Or it can be restricted. So the restriction could be if a particular vehicle movements are not a factor for spreading the disease. So say it's a very specific horse disease, we're not going to restrict the movement of cattle feed trucks. So for lumpy skin disease, we're probably going to say we'll just simply prohibit movement. And then movement can be allowed later under written authority or a permit. But essentially for this scenario, you can choose your own adventure there. Just make sure that if you do say restricted, you list what the restrictions are.
Yep.
So an example would be that you might say, it is restricted in the following circumstances, and it only allows the family vehicle with registration number ABC123 to move into and out of the quarantine area, to go to school and drop the kids at the bus and buy groceries at the supermarket, and that they're not allowed to drive on any livestock areas. That would be a quite common occurring and very reasonable one, particularly given there's a house there. We might say, they can bring in and out food because people have to eat and buy groceries. Generally, we don't prohibit that because it's not related to livestock products or livestock fodder and fittings, but sometimes, depending on the disease, it is important to note because our epidemiologists get quite upset about things and make it quite challenging. So the better we do our quarantine in the first place, the easier we make it for people trying to live their lives. Step 6 is to certify. So we've gotten all the way down the bottom. When satisfied with the document, you can certify it and sign it. So if you are happy that it is correct, noting that once that's signed, because it is a legal document, you cannot make amendments to it. So insert your name, signature and the date today's date is the 28th of the 5th.
No, it's not.
Is that okay? Sorry?
It's the 4th of the 6th today.
It's the 4th of the 6th today. I apologise. My clock's wrong.
You're on last week's time.
Alright, so step 7 is to serve or issue. So how'd you go? Are you happy with that?
Yep.
You've gone that movement is prohibited.
Yep.
So movement onto and movement off is prohibited. Fantastic. So if in this scenario they had a whole bunch of sheep and they wanted to bring in a big trailer full of grain to feed the sheep, if we hadn't written this yet and we'd had that discussion with the farmer beforehand,
Yep.
what do you think you might have changed?
We've probably got two options depending on the trailer and the size and when it's needed. You might allow it to come on but not off initially, or you might allow movement on and off but only under decontamination supervision by Agriculture Victoria.
Yep. I would do it exactly the same with that scenario. Absolutely wouldn't change a thing because we can issue a written authority. But I was just testing to see if you've been paying attention, whether you've just gone to sleep. Either of those is possible. Alright, so we're going to serve and issue the document. But before we can do that, a copy needs to be made to be issued to the property owner if different from the person in charge, and a copy to be retained on file. So this is our copy for Charlie. We need to get a copy of it to give to Indy, who's the property manager, so that Indy's aware of what's going on, and we need a copy for ourselves. So there's multiple ways we can do this. If you're out in the paddock and you don't have a photocopier in your back pocket, you can write out exactly word for word, including if you've made any spelling mistakes, what you put on the one to Charlie, or we can scan it with our phone. Not a photograph, but a scan. So photographs aren't considered a legitimate copy, but a scan and print is. Riddle that one out for me, I don't know, but that falls under the Criminal Procedures Act. It doesn't count, so our Evidence Act won't allow that. Again, I don't write the legislation, I don't have to agree with it, that's just why we have to do it that way. So they're your options, is you either write it out, and I've done that, I've sat and written out multiple copies. It's not fun, but you can do it that way, or you can scan it, or you can photocopy it if you're in the office, or if you're typing it, you can print it and then sign it 3 times, and that's okay. So then we can serve it. So once we're ready, we've got it to serve to Charlie. Under section 133 of the Act, it says a notice is served or given to a person is taken to have been served or given to them if it is delivered to him or her personally, so you can hand it to Charlie. It's not like on the TV ads be like, you've been served, doesn't work like that. They don't have to touch it. You can literally hold it up and say, hi Roger, I'm serving you with this paper, here it is, this is for you. You can leave it at their last known address with a person who is over the age of 16. So we can't serve it on a child, so they can't turn up and give this to your kids and say, give this to daddy. That's not appropriate. Or it can be sent in the post. For our animal disease quarantines, we don't really want to do that because we want them to be aware of it as soon as possible so that they have any hope of complying with the quarantine notice. They are quite serious offences for failing to comply with quarantine. And what we then have to do, so our step 8 is to record the information of how we've done that. So Philippe Crucian says if it's not written down, it does not exist. It's a really good point when it comes to serving a legal document. If we can't state what it is, who it was given to, and when, where and when, then it didn't happen. So that would be where you grab your logbook for your day on your response and you put in that, you know, I served at this time, I served a quarantine notice to this person at this place for this thing. Or you can email back to Ops, hey Ops Manager, I've served that. send a text message. I've served the notice now to this person, here's a copy of it. Right, so that's how we do a quarantine notice. Have you got any questions?
No, that covers it pretty well, I think.
All right. So we'll need to take a copy of that to complete your assessment. And I'll get back to you if there's anything you need to improve, but I can tell you straight away, you've done a very good job. I will need to get you to do some learner feedback forms for this and the previous training, which I apologise I forgot to give you, but I will get those. We might do a big feedback form session in the next one. So our last session that we're going to do, which is another workplace skill one, so similar step-by-step sort of how we do stuff, we'll be setting up our entry-exit using our EAD Go kit. What's your week look like next week?
Next week's pretty open.
Pretty open? Do you feel like that might be something you're excited to do? Will the weather be nice for it?
Yeah, it'll be a good day.
It'll be a good day. Otherwise, we could do it inside if it does turn
It rains.
turn hairy and horrible. Otherwise, you're doing really well. Are you feeling like you're getting anything out of this?
Yep.
Excellent. You're a big talker, aren't you? All right. I'm just going to stop the recording.